Thank you for joining me on this video. On an investment series, we've covered a lot of ground. And I hope in this series, I've instilled in you a desire and a passion for investment real estate. You know, I'm very passionate about real estate investment. I know that if you do it and stay with it, you can comfortably position yourself for retirement with a cash flow that'll carry you in with lots of wealth. And so I've tried to share that. We've looked at the numbers. We've looked at the numbers in getting in, looked at the numbers of acquiring, looked at the numbers in terms of generating wealth once you get to the end of the plan. And we looked at principles like leverage, using somebody else's money to increase your return. We've seen that if we take money from the bank rather than just using our own money, and we go from the cap rate to the return on investment, the amount of return is huge. And we looked at principles like capital appreciation. Over time, at some points there's a speed bump, but over time, properties continue to go up in value, and you benefit there as well. So we covered a lot of important issues, and then we rolled out a simple plan. And the simple plan was buy one property a year for 10 years, never amortize for more than 15 years, and never sell. You follow that plan, and you'll do very, very well. I hope you've got started. I hope you've acquired one or two properties. I hope you're well on your way. You'll find as you walk down that path, it gets easier and easier. The first property is the toughest, coming up with a down payment and learning how to be a landlord. The second property gets a little easier, the third property gets a little easier, and at some point in time, you will start feeling very comfortable being a landlord investor, and you're going to deviate from the plan. You're going to decide 10 properties isn't enough, and some of you are going to go very, very extensive in the type of property you're going to acquire. But I think there's going to come a point in time where a lot of you are going to decide you want to branch into commercial or industrial real estate. And I think that's a really valid decision to make, and I want to talk about that for a few minutes today. What do I mean about commercial and industrial real estate? I'm basically throwing anything almost into that mix as long as it's not habitable for humans. If you're not renting out a dwelling, then we'll call it commercial or industrial. Can be a freestanding building, can be a strip plaza, can be a small office building. There's a number of things, but basically you're renting it out to somebody else who's going to run some kind of a business and generate revenue from that space. That's commercial, industrial real estate. And there's a lot of very significant advantages to being involved in commercial industrial real estate. But to be fair, I need to share with you some of the disadvantages, and I want to go with them first. One of the things you need to be aware of is it's much costlier to get into commercial industrial investment property. You can buy a semi-detached or a single-family home. You can get in, I don't want to date this, but you can get in with $400,000 or less. It's extremely difficult to do so with a commercial property or industrial property. You can do that, but it's going to be a substandard property that's going to have all kinds of tenant turnover, and I advise you to stay away from that. You're probably going to be looking at multiple times the amount to acquire a commercial property than you would to acquire a residential property. Added to that is the amount of the down payment. You can buy pretty much any investment property with 20% down. And in fact, if you're buying a duplex or a triplex and you're going to be living in one of the units yourself, you can get away with 10% down. Most banks and lending institutions, when you're dealing with ICI, want a minimum of 35% down. So it costs more to acquire, costs more to put it down, and then the banks charge you a surcharge on interest. They usually charge a point or a point and a half higher on interest, and they do that because they say there's a higher vulnerability, and there is. When you own a residential rental property, it's always going to be easy to rent because there's always a need for housing, unless you're in a one industry town and the industry closes down. So you'll always be able to have a tenant. You might have a month where you'll lose rent because a tenant moves and you have to do some repair and maintenance, but you're not going to lose much. It's always easy to rent. That's not the case with commercial industrial. People that may always need a roof over their head, but they don't always need a place for a business. And as the economy tightens up, a lot of businesses go under, and it could be 6 months to a year to try and find another suitable tenant. And you're going to have to be able to carry that. The bank's concerned about that. So they want to make sure that they're covered, and they want to make sure that you have deep pockets, and also that you're a seasoned investor that know what you're doing. So they're going to be taking a good look at you, as well as the property and as well as the project. And so these are some of the downsides. But there's some really significant advantages to owning investment property. One of them is that it doesn't come under the Residential Tenancies Act. If you've been a residential landlord for any length of time, you'll be aware of the Residential Tenancies Act, and it's a piece of consumer protection legislation that is not your friend. It's very one-sided in favor of the tenant. It dictates, for example, how much you can raise the rent if the tenant stays there from one year to the next, and it's generally under 2%. It's far less usually than the cost of living. It dictates how you can evict a tenant if they're not paying their rent or if they're causing damage, and it's a very lengthy and expensive proposition. When you're dealing with commercial real estate, you're under the Commercial Tenancies Act, and it's a much more balanced piece of legislation. Another huge advantage is that the tenant does the leaseholds. Now, you may have some expenses as a landlord. They'll sometimes want 2 or 3 months free when they're moving in. You may have to put in the T-bar ceiling or the carpet on the floor, but the fact that they put in all kinds of money to do it up for their use, like a restaurant or a business of some sort, go into the Penn Center or the Mapleview Mall and have a look at some of these spaces and how they're elaborately done. That's all at the cost of the tenant. Now, there's 2 advantages to that. One is the landlord isn't shelling out that money, but the other advantage is that if the tenant is spending money on leasehold improvements, he's going to want to be there for the long haul. So while residential tenancies may turn over every year, it's more the norm for commercial tenancies to have long-term leases. 5 years, I've seen 20-year leases. And if you've got a good anchor tenant, a good tenant who's going to be reliable and stay there, then you can be comfortable as a landlord knowing that the revenue is going to continue to come in. The other thing is that most of these leases are what we call triple net leases. What that means is that the rent that the tenant pays is pretty much going to the bottom line of the landlord. In addition to the base rent, you get something called TMI. TMI stands for taxes, maintenance, and insurance. And the tenant pays that each month as well. That means that the property taxes that you're assessed get passed on to the tenant. It means the money you spend for lawn care, snow removal, and if you got some common space, cleaning of the common space, all these things gets passed on to the tenant. Even your insurance premium gets passed on to the tenant. And so all these fees the tenant pays, and you don't have to address them. And the other real advantage is that the problems are the tenants. They pay their utilities. They pay their heat and their hydro. They also look after the maintenance. If the furnace goes, it's their problem, not yours. If a tap drip, it's their problem, not yours. You're not going to get calls in the middle of the night because of these irritating little things if you're a commercial landlord. So if you buy the right property and you got the right tenant in place, you're more of an investor and less as a hand-on operator of the property that you have. But let me caution you, it becomes very, very important that you pick the right property. And to do that, you need a realtor at your side who knows what they're doing. There's a lot of challenges. First of all, a lot of commercial and industrial properties are not listed on MLS. So you need somebody who knows the score, knows what's for sale, knows what's going on. You need to have somebody who knows things like environmental audits and zoning and the rentability of space and what the market rent is. And let me just take a second and give you a commercial. Whether you're looking to acquire residential investment or commercial investment, I've got an office full of spectacular agents. They really know what they're doing, they're caring, they're capable, and I'd love to connect you with one of them to help you move forward. So keep that in mind. And speaking of moving forward, we've covered a lot of the basics, as I've said. Moving forward, I want to go week by week and cover a lot of things that I've learned in my 40 years as being an investor, owning property, that will help you and avoid some of the pitfalls. I want to look at the Residential Tenancies Act. I want to talk about how to screen for tenants so that you're not discriminating, but you're also being able to get the best tenant that's available to you. I want to talk about when's the best time to buy as well as what to buy. There's a whole host of things we're going to cover from week to week. I hope you've enjoyed it thus far. Stay with me. I hope you continue to enjoy it. And by the way, if you are enjoying it, take time to subscribe so you'll continue to get all these messages, and take time to share them with your friends. We'd love to get the word out. I want to thank you. I look forward to talking to you again next week.